Yeah, if you never failed at something, you really just didn't try hard enough. Your goals weren't
Okay.
set high enough. And that's the funny thing is there's way more learning lessons when we lose. And I get that question often about the name of the company. They're like, so it's all about winning and not about losing. I'm like, no. The idea of Let's Go Win is setting yourself up to win every single day. I promise you, if you're really putting yourself out there, you're going to lose.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Leaders Talk. I am very excited today to have with us J.M. Ryerson. J.M. is the author of Let's Go Win, and that is also his personal brand, everything about it. He is here to tell us about. J.M., welcome. We're excited to have you. Tell us about Let's Go Win.
Well, thanks for having me, Andrew. I appreciate it, brother. It's like I told you, this is my favorite thing I do is
well, me too right now.
It's fun, man. I mean, you get to talk to people, talk about cool stuff, and it's truly is my favorite thing. Let me see. What'd you ask? What about Let's Go Win? Let's Go Win all started. I wrote a book for my two kids. I have a 16-year-old and 13-year-old sons, and I guess the time that it actually published, they would have been 3 years younger, so about 10 and 13 at the time. But I wanted to write a book so they didn't skin their knees as many times as I did. And so the idea was to take all the lessons from my parents and grandparents and mentors and authors that I love to read and put it all into an easy to read manual, if you will, so that if you hopped on a flight from New York to LA, you land, you've read the book, and you have some tangible takeaways. And that took me on this cool journey, man, of coaching people to inspire them to live their best lives. And it started with helping one gentleman lose 80 pounds. And then I helped a PGA golfer start making cuts again, to helping teams and leaders and executives. And so then the podcast, and it's just every single day I get to work with people on them creating their best lives. And yeah, I'm just blessed, man. It's been a great ride, and I love every day what I get to do.
That's a really exciting topic. I mean, basically just the idea of going out there and winning, finding that best life that is there that we hope we have in all of us. So you started out with the book. You started out by writing that down. Why was that something that you felt like was the good beginning point to begin to tell your story and your message?
Yeah, it took about 3.5 years before I ever actually moved on it. So I wrote down the goals, and I make it visible to all my family. And what happened, Andrew, and I will answer your question, I promise. But what happened is my son looked at it and he's like, "Hey, Dad, how's the book going?" And I had to sheepishly look at him and say, "I have about half of chapter 1. And by the way, I don't like that writing thus far." But why I chose to do it is, my kids are my everything. My wife and I, like a lot of parents, we want them to have better lives. And so the idea was I wanted them to have a guide and a roadmap to all these amazing experiences and tangible takeaways, because, on average, I read 30 to 40 books a year. Not everybody's going to do that. And the reason that's important, there's a lot of great lessons in these books. And so for my kids, I want them to have access to this information, but I want it to be in an easy guide. So if they read one book, now they collectively have, several hundred books put into that. And so I, just like any parent, I wanted them to have a better chance at success than maybe I did. And I just felt a book was an easy, well, not easy. It was a great way to leave a legacy in case I got hit by a bus tomorrow, that they have something that they can go back and say, "Oh, this was the philosophy that, Dad had about, courage," or this is a philosophy he had about mindfulness, or the various other chapters that are in the book. So that was why it started that way. And I wish I'd started to write it earlier, brother, but it took on the course it did, and it finally got done. And now I'm working on book 3, believe it or not.
It's amazing. And I want to concentrate on something. It wasn't actually a topic I planned on really going into, but you mentioned so much about how much this was a legacy piece for you. That this was a book that was leaving your legacy for your children, leaving it for other people to know what you did. And we have a lot of potential authors that think about doing books like that, but they sometimes think, well, I can't really turn a legacy piece book, something that tells my story, into something that I can attach to my business. So they generally will gravitate sometimes towards doing the dry funnel type of book first, rather than the I'm going to tell my story. But it sounds to me like you were able to build a brand off telling your story. So tell me a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah, what's fascinating is I remember all the imposter syndrome thoughts, the fact that who am I to write a book on
Yeah.
this, or it's not the right time, I don't have enough experience, yada yada yada. It was so foolish to even think that way, and it's actually really selfish if you think about it that way, because you have so much to share. And what I found is it was the greatest amount of sorry if you can hear some background noise. Somebody's doing some construction outside.
The dangers of live television. Same thing happens here.
It was the greatest amount of just hardcore journaling that I got to do for 6 months, to just hammer down and get all this stuff out of my head. So what started out as a gift for my kids ended up being really an amazing selfish endeavor, because I got so much out of it. So able to express, the fact that, so chapter 1, I start with vulnerability. Well, I'm a kid from Montana that was taught boys don't cry. That's not exactly what you would think I would start with, but that's how profound the idea of being vulnerable has been in my life and in business. And I want my kids to know that that's terrible advice. Boys should cry if it's warranted. And so I wanted to get it on paper. I wanted them to know when life hits you, here's some ways that you can get back up. So hopefully that answered your question, Andrew, but it was just a really amazing journey to write the book. Anybody listening, if you're like, oh, I shouldn't write this, stop being selfish. Just do it, man.
You're right though. That's really, we're stopping ourselves, aren't we? I mean, with your idea of let's go win, that kind of that call to action that you put in your title, that really speaks to me about how much we do kind of stop ourselves. And when we stop ourselves, we're shutting down opportunities for us when we do that, don't we?
Oh man, it's amazing what's happened since, if you're willing to put yourself out there. And how many people have said, thank you so much. This part of the book meant so much to me. I was able to make my life better because of this one section. And imagine if I hadn't written that, how many people I wouldn't have been able to help, how many opportunities. You said you and I probably wouldn't be talking right now if I didn't write the book. So it is crazy how one, commitment to writing that book, how much has come from it. It led me down the path of the coaching, down the path of podcasts, which is, like I said earlier, my favorite thing to do. And the amount of opportunities that it's opened up, both speaking wise, business deals wise, all because I was willing to share a little about me.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's like you almost owe it to yourself to be able to do this. So how do you do that though? I mean, it's you say that and you say yes, having this book or having that opportunity that you can just go after, you should. And a lot of people know that they should. It's not like anyone doesn't want a book. But how do you then take that moment where I know I want it, I know I need it, but then you've got to break through to where you've even gotten that half of a first chapter done?
Why am I writing the book? Once you get clear on why you're doing it, and I was clear on that it was for my kids. I just didn't have somebody hold my feet to the fire. And the moment when Trey, my youngest, said, "Hey, Dad, how's it going?" He both crushed me and inspired me in the same moment, because I realized how selfish I was being by not writing that book. And so when you get clear on why you're writing it, and then give permission to someone else to say, hey, I know you said this was important to you. How can I hold you accountable? Can I check in with you? Can I read the chapters as you go through it? Because here's the other thing. I didn't like my writing. And many people, they're going to say the same thing. You are your worst and most harsh critic. it doesn't mean that it's not valuable. It just means that you don't like the way it's being portrayed. By the way, there's amazing ghostwriters, there's amazing editors. Just start doing it and let the process take over.
And that is another interesting thought to me. That reminds me, I may have shared it on another episode, but I'll share it again for the audience that might have missed it. I attended a talk at one time with Pat Rothfuss, the author of In the Name of the Wind, who, you know, now being made into movies and all that. And he had said that he was sitting there and he was writing, and it was one night, it was late at night, and he was writing and writing and writing, and he realized in the middle of it, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing I've ever written. No one's ever going to read it. It's terrible. But then he said the very next thing I did, I just kept writing. And I kept going on to the end. Because yes, you're right. You're your own worst critic in a lot of these situations. So what value do you see of having a third party, an accountability partner, somebody that can come in from the outside and help you in this process to be a more objective set of eyes?
Yeah. So the best analogy I can give is leave a voicemail for yourself and see if you actually sound the way that you think you do, which, by the way, none of us think we sound the way we do. It's fascinating. And so you really don't have a good lens to say this is good or bad because you're being such a harsh critic. So it's one of those empowering things, because the quality is actually going to come through the quantity of your writing. The more you write, the better it's going to be. It's not like the first piece that you're going to do is going to be amazing. No, you're going to make errors, and it's probably not going to be a clear, concise way. Just like everything, you get better with practice. So that's the biggest thing I would say is just write, just start, because that quality will come and you don't know when it's going to happen. And there's days where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't feel like writing, and it ends up being your best work. Or there's days where you're like, oh, this is going to be awesome, and it's absolute junk. You just don't know. So just keep doing it. And then that third set of eyes will be the better gauge to say, wow, that's awesome. Or nope, that does stink. You're right. And by the way, that's just amazing feedback, because it's just keep doing the quantity.
Yeah. And that's also an interesting topic too for a lot of our listeners. Many of them have that question. It's like, well, you know, they imagine the writing process. They think about what that looks like. They don't think about the editorial process and how much of what actually goes into creating that final product comes from getting that help. It's almost like they think, okay, well, that's where my spelling and punctuation errors get fixed. Yeah. So, you know, how important was the editorial experience for you?
Yeah, it was amazing. And honestly, my first book, I overdid it. I think I had my mom, then I had two other friends read every chapter. I must have read each chapter at least 6 times. And so it was a bit of overkill, honestly, in hindsight, because I kept chopping it down. And so when I started working, her name's Jen, she's awesome. When I started working with Jen, she's like, stop, just send it to me and we'll have a discussion. And if I wasn't clear on a point, that's where she'd say, I don't get it, or what were you trying to say here? And then it starts to get some clarity around it. So the editorial process is truly magical. I think editors I think they're really underpaid, if you want my own, because they make so much of the work sound great or make it make sense. Because again, if it's jumbled up in our head, it looks clear, like, oh, I know where I'm going. But then you read it and you're like, I'm not sure where I was going there. It's fascinating how that happens. So imagine being the reader who wasn't inside your head. They don't even know where the thought was going. That editor is going to come in and say, no, this is how we can make that make sense. Let's take some of this out. We need to add a little bit more there. So your editor is truly your best friend.
Yeah, exactly. And that emphasizes about, you know, finding the right editor.
Yeah, for sure. And Jen, I give her all the credit. She really handled so much of it, the book design. I mean, there's things that you never think of when you start writing. You know, how is this all going to come together? Do I self-publish? Do I have a publisher? You know, there's so many things, but here's the deal. It'll all come together. Don't worry about getting all the fine details. Just start doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you did it, you got your book, it came out. So how did you then segue that into just something that you had, maybe that your kids were going to read, into something to actually build a business off of?
Yeah, it's fascinating because the book published February 2020,
Mhm.
and that meant a bunch of speaking gigs were started. The book tour is going to go. Well, the world shut down March 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally did like a book signing, getting ready to do all the travel. Books are delivered in the garage and the world shuts down. So I think what happened next. So somebody asked me, "Oh, I read your book. Can you coach my son?" And then another person said, "Oh, I read your book. Can you coach this person?" And I was like, "Yeah, I could do that." That wasn't the purpose, but yeah. And so it just turned into a business because what I found is I've been coaching people for years in another industry. I just hadn't put a title to it. And so, and then when the world was shut down, it was like, well, why not start the podcast? And that was just like putting lighter fluid on the fire. It just kept going. So I'd love to tell you I was clear, like I'm going to write the book, which is going to lead to this, and it's going to be this really streamlined process. It wasn't any of that. But it was beautiful the way it came together, and it still continues. This is never going to be a finished product. Let's Go Win will evolve and change. And again, the idea is that someday when I'm gone, my kids have taken it over and they've taken Let's Go Win to where it goes, because the idea of Let's Go Win is for all of us to win together. So I didn't call it JM Ryerson or jmryerson.com. It's like, I want everybody to win in this process. And so it's taken on a life of its own, and it's been a cool ride.
Yeah, I love the way I love that you just happened onto it. That is really great because honestly, that's similar to our story, our Leaders Press story, that it just kind of occurred as we were learning that our own methodology worked for other people. So that's absolutely fascinating, but it's also fascinating to me that you can take something that, you know, maybe intended to be a legacy piece, and we're able to find so much out of it just by being able to unlock your own storytelling. Because I mean, that's what people are really interested in, isn't it? It's learning about your story, and that lets them dig deeper.
Well, and that's the fascinating part that I've found. You're right. And the ability to tell a story. I mean, that's what we're storytellers by nature. You
Right.
know, you're hanging out with your buddies, you're telling stories. When you're going camping, you're telling stories. It's the one piece I will say that I want to continue to improve at in my writing is telling those stories, because again, once you ask a question, boom, I'm there. But that doesn't always happen in my writing, and it can be extremely like direct and to the point. It's like, wait a minute, there's a reason everybody loves a parable, and there's a reason that they sell like crazy, because it's a story. And so the more you can craft whatever you're writing into a story, the more your viewers and your people that you influence are going to be really bought in.
Yeah, because I mean they're coming in it for you. I mean, it's like you say, the imposter syndrome concept. We run into that a lot. It's a fairly common thing that many potential authors, one of the things that draws them back is saying to themselves, well, everybody else has written this before. But you know, you can't have an imposter syndrome if you're telling your story about your legacy in your book. There's no way to have it. There's only one you, right?
100%. That is such a good sentence that, or the way you put that together is so true. The only lens is you. So nobody has ever written what you're about to write ever again. And that's the beautiful thing, is because your experience is unique to you. Sure, somebody could have something similar, but it was never through your lens. And so if you look at it that way, you can offer so much by saying, here was my experience. This is what came of it. Here's what you can potentially apply or learn from what I went through. So it is completely unique to you. So that should never be something to not write or do whatever because it's your perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was saying, and yeah, and don't we do the storytelling in a way in which we can make education in a way that can be relatable to other people? Because you know, you tell your story that relates to other things that have occurred to other people in their lives.
It's just it. And by the way, you don't know who's going to like it or not like it. I mean, there's people that you think, oh, they're going to love it, and they're like, for instance, my son, the one that I wrote the book for, has still not read the entire book. And I let that go, right? I had to be like, all right, it's cool. When your time, you will. My other son has read it several times. And it's funny. It's like, at first it bothered me, and now I'm like, look, whenever he's ready for it, it'll be there. Kind of like when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. Same thing
Yeah.
for books.
Well, I mean, that speaks though to also to, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to read your book, not everybody's going to like it, but it speaks to the fear that a lot of potential authors have of rejection, and that's always in their minds. Like letting that baby out, when that baby's out the door, there's a chance somebody's not going to like your kid when he's out the door. And everybody wants everybody to like the kid when they leave the door. So that becomes an obstacle with a lot of people with the book, because they're afraid, well, what if somebody doesn't like it?
Yeah.
How do you overcome that?
Yeah, the only certainty is I promise you somebody is not going to like it, just like somebody doesn't like you. The moment that you try to be something for everyone is the moment that you've lost yourself. So it's funny where this idea of rejection, I promise you, no matter what, there were people that didn't like Mother Teresa. That's pretty hard to do, but it's true. So don't take it personally. You're just not their cup of tea. And by the way, they might not be yours. And that's okay. We all have different styles. We all have different, takes on life. So it is a certainty. I promise you, somebody won't like it. Somebody will. And that's totally okay.
But isn't it more valuable to you? Like, let's say that you have 10 people that read your book, didn't like it, they hated it, threw it in the trash. Went so far as that. But isn't it that one person that read it and it changed their lives that makes it worth it, even if 10 people others that say it's trash?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when somebody says, wow, when I read this, it really changed me, there's nothing more fulfilling than that. But you know what I'll also say is that feedback, when somebody says, I don't like it, I think it's a piece of trash, I always respond with thank you. Can I ask you specifically what you didn't like? And when they give me that feedback, it's gold, because there's something maybe that I could have done better or differently, or maybe not. But that feedback is actually somebody that spent the time to give it to you. They actually care about you more than somebody that's like, oh, it's amazing, and they've never read the book. That feedback, somebody's actually spent the time to say, this is garbage, this is why. And you know what? Just say thank you. That feedback will help you grow your business, your writing, name an endeavor in life. That feedback is gold, and just say thank you.
Well, it's all about creating connections and conversations, and being able to have self-reflection. It's like the butterfly effect. You say that a butterfly flaps his wings in Africa, it creates a hurricane in South America. Your book basically was a butterfly effect for you, for what I see. I mean, just having it has unlocked so many opportunities and so much knowledge that you wouldn't have had access to otherwise.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I never expected for any more than 2 people to ever read the book. So it is wild. Here's the other thing I didn't say, Andrew. When I moved from California to Florida, which was about 2 years ago, I was cleaning out the garage. And the reason that's important is I was looking through this box and I see this old journal from when I was 20 or 21. It was my junior year of college. Well, guess what? Right in there was Let's Go Win, with the logo in black and white, because I was just writing with pen and paper. I had forgotten about that for over 20 years, but it was marinating in here. So after the book was already published, everything's going, the company has started, I had done that 20 some odd years ago, and I just didn't realize it. And it's one of those fascinating things, because it's clearly important to me, this idea of Let's Go Win, because as a 20-year-old kid, I was thinking about this stuff. I was writing about this stuff, and then I put it away and forgot about it. So it's crazy, brother. When I pulled it out, I mean, it was pretty emotional. I was like, holy cow, I didn't realize this had happened. I had totally forgotten about it.
Yeah, so often I think that might be the case. We have these dreams that we look at and we say, oh, maybe one day I'll be able to do that. But then, so much of life becomes either discouragement or, this sounds hard, this sounds difficult, it throws up a lot of reasons for people to just say, oh, well, I'm just not going to follow my dream. I'll do the easy stuff instead.
It's just kind of weird to me because if you think about it, it's not the end is when you're like, yes, this is awesome. And I will tell you, both successful businesses and failed businesses, I look back and it wasn't the sell when I sold the company that I was like, oh, that was amazing. I look back at all the really challenging times. Those were the best times. That's when we were smiling and laughing, being challenged. So it's funny to me when people are like, oh, that's going to be hard. I'm like, oh, congrats. That's awesome. You're getting better. When you're uncomfortable, that's growth. So it is funny how we say we want the easy, but the truth is all the gifts, all the gold is in that journey, is in those difficult times.
Yeah, because I mean, look what happens when you finally get over the hump, the rewards that are on the other side. I mean, it's just like you unlocked this part of your business where now you're doing something that you're fantastic at, you're having fun. You open this by saying you're living your best life because this is what you enjoy to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fun. I would have never 5 years ago, if you're like, hey, what are you going to be doing? It would not have been this. I promise you. I had no idea, but I surrendered to the whole thing. And that kept coming where it's like, all right, here's an opportunity. You can choose to take it or not. And I've said yes again and again. And it's just been so cool. That doesn't mean I haven't got my butt kicked. I promise you, I fail. I'm really good at failing. But here's the other thing. I continue to get back up and I'm willing to put myself back out there again. And some of it, like we talked about, people are going to love, some people aren't. They're going to listen to this episode and they're going to be like, this guy's awesome or he sucks. And guess what? I'm cool with that.
I love that you're not afraid to talk about failing, because I think that is such an important part of the storytelling process as well. With, you're putting out a book. I'm sure you're talking about times in which you failed as well. Doesn't that helps people so that they know what to avoid in the future?
Yeah. If you never failed at something, you really just didn't try hard enough. Your goals weren't set high enough. And that's the funny thing is, there's way more learning lessons when we lose. And I get that question often about the name of the company. They're like, so it's all about winning and not about losing. I'm like, no, the idea of Let's Go Win is setting yourself up to win every single day. I promise you, if you're really putting yourself out there, you're going to lose. You're going to skin your knees. Just like this was the idea for my kids. I promise you, they're going to go make all the silly mistakes I did too. But now at least they have a guide there to say, oh, here's one way to approach it. Because my dad definitely, failed quite a bit, but it is interesting, this idea of failing, how it's a negative. That's growth. Every time you fail, you got that much better and you learn so much more than if everything comes easy. And here's the other thing. If it all came easy, you get bored of it anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, exactly. You're completely correct. Easy stuff just becomes that boring job that you don't like, the monotony that you're trying to avoid. Absolutely. So to our potential listeners, many of whom are fence sitters, I mean, they're exploring the publishing process right now. This is something new to them. What would be your message to them, to the ones that haven't committed yet and haven't made their effort?
Just go for it. I hear so many people say, oh, you wrote a book, I want to write one too. And it's like, just do it. You have some amazing stuff inside of you, and don't be selfish, just share it. So don't be afraid of it either, because I promise you're going to make a lot of mistakes and you're going to learn a ton. So I just go for it. That would be my overall team. Just go for it.
I love it. I love it. And it's true. I mean, again, from our perspective, us just going for it's why we're where we're at. You just going for it is why you're where you're at. So if our audience wants to go for it and get in touch with you and maybe see what they can do about engaging with you in some business, where can they find you?
Brother, Let's Go Win podcast is the first place I'm going to send them, because I think if you want to know anything more about me, that's the platform. This is me, raw, unfiltered. Here you go. And then obviously Let's Go Win 365 on any social media platform. But truly, Andrew, anybody that would go to the podcast, because that's my focus, is growing that show so I can continue to give back. So the more people can share it, subscribe, review it, that helps us grow. So I really appreciate you saying that and having me on, brother. You do a good show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We've only been doing it a short time, so that was very much in the words of a former news anchor, doing it live. Well, JM, we appreciate your compliments. We appreciate you being on. Those links to your podcast should be there down below, so our audience can go ahead and click through with that and experience some of what JM has to say directly on his podcast. And again, we thank you for having him, and we wish you the best.